It's Jim Monaghan and Chris Swendeman. We're back with the 2-minute drill, and we have a special guest, a 10-year Major League veteran. You can hear him on MLB Radio Network on SiriusXM, as well as the Atlanta Braves games. CJ Nitkowski, always good to talk to you.
Yeah, Jim, Chris, great to be with you guys. How are you?
I was going to start out by asking you about facing Jeff Kent, who, of course, was just into the Hall of Fame. And as I'm going through some notes, CJ, I think you actually faced Michael Jordan in the minors more than you faced Jeff Kent.
That's correct. I think it was just 2 at-bats against Jeff Kent, and I faced Michael Jordan 5 times, and Jordan definitely much more memorable, for sure. Obviously, when you're facing one of the greatest athletes in any sport, you're not going to forget that, especially when he's trying to do something different. That was also my first year in baseball. I had just gotten drafted, went down to the Southern League where he was playing for the Birmingham Barons, and I was in Chattanooga. So, yes, you're right about that. 5 more plate appearances. And definitely ones that I remember a lot more clearly than the couple of times I faced Jeff Kent, which I believe was 98 when I faced him.
I think you're right. And it was just the 2 plate appearances. And, I was going to ask you, what was it like facing a future Hall of Famer? But who knew at the time, right?
You don't know. You never know, right? I mean, I think certainly when his career was over, I always believed he was a Hall of Famer, and I felt like he should have got in via the writers. I'm looking at the game logs right now, and the couple of times I faced him was in April, both times April 2nd and April 9th of 1998. So that was it. And I'm wondering, too, if he was in that game where I got my first save. He may have. I'm not quite sure because I had my first save at San Francisco. That year in 1998. But yeah, I mean, Bonds was obviously the guy that you were focused on a little bit more in that lineup, as far as especially me being a left-handed guy back then when you only had to face lefties, made life a little bit easier for guys like me to kind of get in and get out. And so Bonds was the focus, but that at the time was when Jeff Kent was hitting behind him. And I'm looking at this one game log, and between the 2 of them, they had 5 hits, but luckily one of them was not against me. But yeah, that was, I mean, it was always a good player, always highly respected and played the game hard. And I think people kind of knew that and picked up on that with him. And I'm glad he got in. He deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Like I said, I wish he would have gotten in via the writers. I think it was really important also that he got in. When you start kind of looking at other second basemen that are out there, I mean, I will continue to push really hard for Lou Whitaker when you can kind of compare these 2 guys together. I know WAR doesn't tell you the whole story, but Lou Whitaker is about 20 points higher on the WAR side than Jeff Kent. Obviously, Jeff Kent has the homers, but you start thinking about some guys that are coming down the line like Chase Utley and others. It's important that some of these better second basemen get in. So good to see Jeff Kent get the nod.
CJ, you brought up Barry Bonds, and that's one of the questions I was going to ask you. How do you think Barry Bonds woke up feeling this morning that not only is he not in, not only didn't he get voted in by the Hall of Famers, but now also Jeff Kent got in before him, and it was well known that they did not like each other when they played together. So he might be a little grumpier than usual today, no?
Yeah, it's an interesting one for sure. Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I feel like for both him and Roger Clemens, they kind of know where this thing has gone and what to expect. I think the expectations probably have come down. Certainly don't know what it's like to be in that position, because I always think that there's got to be that little glimmer too, right, of hope, and thinking that there's going to be the possibility to get in, or maybe they've both kind of gotten past it. Against kind of similar stories there with the 2 of them. But yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, listen, you don't have to get along with every teammate. I do think that it is probably, not say more common, but certainly back then, I think guys, the relationships maybe are a little bit better, or guys are a little bit more kind of going with the flow and don't get nearly as upset. Not to say that it doesn't happen, but I think that was, was pretty well documented. And even the way Jeff Kent kind of talks about it, is there are times where they battled, and we saw it. We could see in the dugout at times when it got a little bit heated between those 2. So I don't. Does he genuinely not like him anymore? I don't know if it carries on. I mean, I think about some teammates here and there that maybe I didn't get along with, but you get past your career and you realize it's not that big of a deal. I think every time this comes up, though, if you're a guy like Barry Bonds or Roger Clemens, and you see a guy get in that you had a better career than, it's just a reminder of why you're kind of not there. And it's a really dicey topic. It's always interesting to listen to those guys kind of talk about it. It's unfortunate for our game, but there's a reason why Jeff Kent is in and Barry Bonds is not.
Someone else who wasn't voted in yesterday was one of my favorite players of all time, in Don Mattingly. And I found it curious that only one player in Jeff Kent got in when they have the ability to vote in 2. And that was always something that I've talked to Jim extensively about. We've talked on this podcast about that. The writers, are allowed so many, and the Hall of Fame voters are allowed so many. If you were able to be on that committee and cast a vote, what criteria would you look for as a former player yourself? What would you want to base it on as far as stats and traits that would make you vote for one or two players? Because I always find it interesting when you see one player get in, but you guys could have voted in two. Why'd you only go for one? It just intrigues me to find out the mindset of, why they would vote for one, not two, or other players in general.
Yeah, and I would put Dale Murphy on that list as well from this last group, right?
Absolutely.
That obviously did not get in. It's a big deal here down in Atlanta. Obviously there's two different ways, right? This was a committee vote, so there were 16 members of this committee. You needed 12 votes to get in. Then you have the writers, which are somewhere around 350 or so, and you got to get your 75%. So when you have that big of a group on the writer's side, when a lot of these players are going through for the first time, you're going to get varying opinions, right? Obviously, guys are going to have, and girls are going to have different ways that they think about it and look at players and how they vote for them. For me, historical context, I think, matters. And I know we do it by position, and I guess we probably should. It matters, right? The idea of a catcher compared to an outfielder, and how much do you weigh defense, and how much do you weigh postseason and team contributions. But I do think something about being one of the best of your era, and certainly for Dale Murphy, that's where it shows up. Don Mattingly is so highly admired. I'm with you. I grew up a Yankee fan and remember sitting in the upper deck in right field, and I had printed out a Don Mattingly sign on my computer that you couldn't read if you weren't 2 feet from it. But I remember it clear as day on my Matrix dot printer that I had, and thought it was like the coolest little thing. It had the tearaway edges on it. And then later got to actually be in uniform with him because he was a coach on that 2004 team when I was there for a little bit with the Yankees, which was really cool. Always pull really hard for Don Mattingly. Really wanted to see him win a World Series. It does sound like he's getting a little bit closer to potentially now joining the Philadelphia Phillies staff, which will be cool because his son is a general manager there. Unfortunately, I will not be rooting for him to win a World Series as a Phillies coach, assuming that happens, because I, of course, call games for the Atlanta Braves and would like to see the Phillies lose as much as possible. So that part of my allegiance will change. But the historical context, I think, is really important. That's why I want to look at a guy like Lou Whitaker. It's a 75 career WAR, but you can sit there and go up and down the line. He's a Hall of Famer for me. I'm a little bit lack some objectivity because he was a teammate. I got to play with him his very last year, which was my first year, but always a guy that I've pulled hard for and believe he deserves to be in. Looking at a guy like Murph as a two-time MVP, I feel like Dale Murphy deserves to be in. The only thing with Don Mattingly, of course, was the injuries, right? And that's one of the saddest parts, I think, of his story. His story is an amazing story. He's lived an incredible baseball life, but we all saw it. We remember going through the back injuries. I specifically remember that setup that they had for him in the dugout for him to sit and hopefully help him along a little bit. He got his one shot at the postseason. He absolutely went off in the postseason. If you go look at those numbers in that series, he crushed it well over 400 with a bunch of doubles and a homer in there. It's just, unfortunately, I think it's the little bit of time that he missed because of the injuries. Compile numbers is a big one for a lot of voters. There's some automatics that you hit that'll get you in the Hall of Fame these days. It's going to be interesting going forward because guys aren't playing as long, and so they're not going to reach a lot of those milestone numbers. So it's difficult to do. I obviously you have your no doubt Hall of Famers, and then it's like what happens to the rest, and what do you look at? And I look at a couple of different numbers, but again, it's by position. I kind of like OPS plus, which is a little bit more of an advanced metric, and kind of putting that in perspective for guys and where they stand among their peers. I will tell you, down here in Atlanta, we also pull really hard for Andrew Jones. His defense off the charts over the course of his career. The best, for a 10-year run, he was the best center fielder in baseball, and he also has 400-plus home runs. That feels like that should be a no-brainer. Hopefully he gets in this year. I think Carlos Beltran probably will. We're all hoping here that Andrew Jones is going to join him.
I remember speaking with you, CJ, when you were pitching for the Atlanta Braves, and Leo Mazzoni basically said to you, you have the best defensive center fielder in baseball. Use him.
Yeah, it was a big part of their pitching plan. I remember clear as day, and their whole thing, and of course we remember the Braves during that run and the great pitchers that they had, and we would joke about Tom Glavine, getting a couple of inches off the plate, and Greg Maddux maybe getting a couple of inches off the plate. But the philosophy there was pitch away and let Andrew go catch the baseball. I mean, that's exactly what Leo Mazzoni told me in spring training. And I was going through a period of my career. I was about 10 years into my career at that point, where I started using my cutter in a little bit more, a front door two-seam fastball into righties, and even running my sinker into lefties. And it was unfair, but essentially, if you got beat in trying to go in, you were going to hear about it. But if it was away, no, because they felt like, again, with Andrew Jones and the great defense that he provided, go ahead and pitch it down and away, let him hit it as hard as they want to center field. Andrew's going to go catch it.
Here in New York, fans are really cranky right now, Met fans at least, because of the Edwin Diaz signing with the Dodgers. 3 years, $69 million, I believe, which was just a couple of million more than what the Mets offered. And we were talking a little earlier about the little bit of friction that there may have been between Bonds and Kent. And I'm wondering, there were reports a few weeks ago about stuff that was going on this past season between Jeff McNeil and Francisco Lindor and some other things going on in that dugout. And you look at the numbers that Diaz signed for with LA, and while obviously the thought of going for a World Series with the Dodgers is very attractive, you're thinking, maybe there's another reason why he wanted to get out of here.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are thinking about that today. Now, it sounds like there was some deferred money in there, so what the actual average annual value of the contract or present-day value might come down a little bit, but it was close enough, right? It was close enough where I think a lot of people would look at it and say, why would the Mets not just throw that extra couple of million in there to make it happen if that's what it was going to take? And so what always happens, there's just always drama surrounding this team. They cannot shake it for the life of them. We like that here in Atlanta. We like seeing Mets fans get really worked up and get emotional about things that are going on with their team. It only adds to the drama. I was fortunate to put on that Met uniform for a little while. And prior to becoming a Braves broadcaster, I always had a spot in my heart for the Mets, just because it felt like it was always something, right? And kind of being the younger brother of the Yankees and everything else that comes along with being in New York. I no longer feel that way now because of the side that I'm on here. With the Braves. So we do love the drama. It is interesting, and I think it's a fair question, but I don't know if you'll ever get a straight answer to it, right? That's one of those things that, is Edwin Diaz going to ever step in front of a microphone and say, I didn't want to be in New York anymore? Because he knows he'll hear about it for 3 years, and he'll hear about it really aggressively, obviously, when you come through town. He's going to hear about it anyway, probably. The thing about the Dodgers that I think sometimes, I don't say it gets overlooked, but we look at the money, we look at the success of the team. It is Los Angeles, right? You're going to get great weather every time. They had better than 4 million fans this year, which is incredible. But the infrastructure that they have put in place when it comes to the clubhouse and the way that they travel is second to none, right? Not only do they have all of this money, but I'm sure Edwin Diaz went on a visit. I've been there plenty of times as a visitor. And was probably wowed by what he saw on the home side that blew him away. Not to say that the Mets don't have, great a great situation, the way that their whole ballpark is set up and everything else that comes along with putting on a big league uniform. But teams have worked harder and harder to make those things more attractive, how they handle family stuff. You hear a lot about it from the Blue Jays. The Blue Jays have worked hard to try to make that a destination because they understand how difficult it can be for American players to want to come play in Canada. And so they've done a really nice job with that. They felt like getting to a World Series, and they've been able to put that on display. And obviously they signed Dylan Cease and spent some money. But what the Dodgers have is really special in that setup. I don't know if you guys had heard about this year, but they were using 2 planes this year.
Wow!
When they were traveling,
I did hear
and
that.
One of those planes was just for the players. It would be like the players and like one coach. That plane would leave like 30 minutes earlier than the other plane, and then it was the coaches, media, staff, everybody, because these travel parties have gotten really, really big now in baseball. Would be on the other plane. I mean, that's that is unbelievable wealth to be able to flaunt a little bit, and the comfort level, and just a small taste of what these players have there in Los Angeles. So I think for Edwin Diaz, it was much about could have been about getting out of New York, but also just everything that Los Angeles had to offer, and for even money. You're talking about 2 high tax situations, regardless, right? So it's not like it was between Texas and L.A. This was between New York and L.A., and I think for him, he wanted to go experience it.
And if baseball needs a villain, they have it now with the Dodgers, who are the new evil empire.
Yeah, they are. And the thing that, I said this at the beginning of the offseason, right? Their payroll was down about $60 million to start the offseason compared to where they were a year ago. So as much as we look at it and say, well, they're continuing to throw money at this team, and of course they do, they're flush with cash right now, obviously, because Shohei Ohtani brings you in all the money in the world, and you have these back-to-back World Series. I mentioned the 4 million fans. They have an unbelievable television deal, and they also have a lot of space compared to where they spent last year. So it was not going to surprise me at all to see them get Edwin Diaz and Kyle Tucker. I said it as soon as the offseason started, and they've already gotten one of them, and they can very easily get both of these guys and have a very similar payroll that they had a year ago.
You hear this term now that seems to be coming like in vogue, the hedge fund teams, the Dodgers, the Mets, even maybe the Yankees, although they're kind of, Hal Steinbrenner's been fighting for the salary cap. And versus the smaller market teams like, the Pirates, the Brewers, the Brewers shook that theory this year with one of the best records of baseball. But does it does the Diaz signing and maybe Tucker or whoever else the Dodgers go out and get, does it put even more pressure on the Mets and Yankees to do something at the winter meetings to kind of offset and not have their fan bases completely lose their minds in the middle of the Dodgers just being able to basically spend and get whoever they tab who they want and basically go get them at will?
Yeah. I think for these executives, they try not to react, right? They understand what they have to do. They understand the pushback that they'll get ultimately from fans. Brian Cashman has been at this for a long time, and he's done it in that market. So I don't think he is swayed one way or the other. I think he is motivated by trying to compete and win a World Series, do it within whatever their confines are. Right? You mentioned Steinbrenner and some of the things that he had said about, well, we got to give New York $100 million every year in February. And he's almost laying it out there as if to say, right, without saying it directly, we're not spending a lot of money this winter, right? That's what it kind of sounded like, hearing some of those quotes. I think, it's always interesting with a guy like David Stearns when he comes from Milwaukee. It's one way of doing things. Now, all of a sudden, you feel like you have an unlimited payroll, which, of course, it's limited. But, we know now we have 4 tiers of luxury tax because of Steve Cohen, right? They call that final kind of last line there, the Cohen tax. But at the same time, you're also trying to operate in a way that you haven't operated really before. I wondered about that for Andrew Friedman when he went from Tampa to the Dodgers. Now, early on, it was a lot of kind of getting that payroll right. They were eating a lot of money to kind of correct some things. And eventually he got to the point where he, I think from the outside for me, realizing they had to build as much depth as possible, no matter how expensive it was. And they could sit there and spend over their mistakes. If you look at the starting pitching and how many starting pitchers they've actually been able to bring in. So they've operated that way. I always use the Chris Taylor example and Tommy Edman, right? Chris Taylor, they'd given him I think it was a 4-year deal. It didn't work out, right? That's kind of like your utility guy that's got a decent contract, and they were just able to go do it again, right, with Tommy Edman. Now, it's somewhat similar players where most teams, they're going to take one shot at that. They're not going to be able to do it twice. And so you are chasing money. The Dodgers, again, are in a completely different place, but maybe not that far off of where a team like the New York Mets are. I will tell you that last offseason, when Juan Soto was a free agent, I thought the Yankees were better off not giving him, $760 million because you'd like to think that's more money to spread around. He also is probably not going to stay in the outfield that long. And now here we are watching this offseason and even last one, after they had signed him. What did they do with Pete Alonso? Very short-term deal. He has an opt-out. He takes it. I think part of the reason is they know that sooner than later, Juan Soto's going to have to take those DH at-bats. Even though Pete Alonso continues to crush it offensively and is coming off a great year, I don't think you can give him a 5 or 6 year deal because at some point during that, he's going to have to DH, and so is Juan Soto. Juan Soto's not a very good outfielder, even though he's still young. So I think at least in that case, when you look at that kind of situation in particular, I feel like that's where Juan Soto gets you in a little bit of trouble. And I do think that for David Stearns, he's not going to want to overcommit. And they talked about it with pitchers. It's a tough thing to do, right? Yeah, okay, it's great for the Yankees right now, even though they missed Garrett Cole all of last year. They still had a pretty good run, but it was Max Fried, it's Carlos Rodon. These longer-term pitcher contracts, you're going to miss time. Like Dylan Cease has been incredibly healthy. Right? I don't think he's pretty much ever missed a big league start, but he had Tommy John surgery in high school. He's probably going to miss some time. It's a 7-year deal. The odds of him not missing time and maybe significant time are really low, or should say high. It's probably going to happen. And I think David Stearns is trying to mitigate that risk as much as possible. Fans don't want to hear it. It's annoying, but it's the reality, I think, of how these guys operate.
You mentioned Pete Alonso. How much of a factor do you think what Kyle Schwarber got from the Phillies, the 5/150, how much of a factor do you think that will be with where Alonso eventually ends up?
Yeah, I think if anything, it hurts him because it takes a team off the board where he would have fit, right? If he had gone somewhere like Cincinnati, right, that whole thing about maybe going home and going to Cincinnati or even Pittsburgh, and I know that probably wasn't, they were never going to get where the Phillies were, but at least they threw their hat in the ring and tried to make something happen. That probably would not have affected Pete Alonso as much as him going back to Philly, because I think he was a fit in Philly, at least as their DH. Now, Dave Dombrowski said that Bryce Harper would not go back in the outfield. Like if you're wondering about Alonso, would he have played first there? It doesn't seem like that would have been the case, but it takes a team with deep pockets. That's one less team that's available for his services, right? So that's if anything, I think it hurts him. I know some people look at the money and the years and say, well, then someone's going to have to match that. At the end of the day, for these teams, all they have to worry about is what the other teams are doing. Like if you're trying to outbid another team to get Pete Alonso in your uniform, it's just a matter of what everybody else is going to spend. So I don't know if I always believe in a player has a good year and he raises the market. Ultimately, there's only so many seats at the table in order to make that happen. And in the case of Pete Alonso, one of those seats is now filled.
Who do you think gets traded first, Skubal or Skenes?
Well, Skubal's only got a year left, right? So Skenes, for me, I know a lot of people want to see him in a different uniform eventually. He only has 2 years of service time, right? So they have 4 years of control. He should be in a Pittsburgh Pirates uniform for 3 more years. Maybe 2 on the absolute short end if you want to try to take advantage of it if somebody's going to knock your socks off. But you got to keep him in your uniform as long as you possibly can. Hopefully, what we heard about Schwarber with them is a sign of things to come where they're going to start to spend some money on their offense because they have really good pitching. Not just him, but that pitching staff runs pretty deep, so they'd have a chance to win if they had any help on the offensive side. In the case of Skubal, those Scott Harris comments were very interesting. It's one of those situations where we always are wanting honesty, right, from players and from executives. But if I'm a Tiger fan, that's not honesty I want. And the honesty in base what he said today was talking about how nobody is untouchable. Right. Fans don't want to hear that. They want to see Tarik Skubal making that opening day start. Now, if you're trying to be objective, it probably makes a lot of sense to trade him. Like if you have no emotion tied into this thing as a fan and just looking at what makes the most sense for the Detroit Tigers, who probably have almost zero chance of getting him extended. I would be shocked and floored if they figure out a way to give him the $400 or so million contract that he deserves. So now is the return there is can you match up with the team that is going to give you what you need? You don't want to miss on this one. Right. And then it becomes, this kind of trade is so difficult to figure out. Do you go for 4 or 5 players and hope 1 or 2 hit? Or do you go for that 1 or 2 player deal, but you feel like it's more of a sure thing? Right. For the Tigers, they've been trying to fill third base for a while. They've re-engaged with Alex Bregman, but if they can't, is there a Skubal trade that could get you a third baseman that you feel great about, that you have control for at least 4 or 5 years at the big league level? Right. Those are the things that'll be tempting. The other way you can do it is you can start the season with him on your club and then see how things go and take it up to the deadline. If for some reason you're not contending, then it's very easy and all the pressure is off from the fans at that point as far as trading him goes. The problem with that route, of course, is if you are contending, now what are you going to do? Now you just got to hold him and give him the qualifying offer, and you're not going to get much in return but a draft pick, and that one will sting a little bit. So I don't envy Scott Harris here at all. This is a really, really difficult spot to be in, but you got to probably remove all the emotion from it and pull the trigger and get a Skubal deal done.
In talking about the fans, after the Red Sox won their second World Series in the 2000s, I was talking with one of their front office executives about how they put the team together and, who they might be looking to keep and who might not be there the following year. And he said, part of our job is to make you fall in love with this team. And then when those players leave, make you fall in love with the next group that comes along. And I had never thought of it that way, but that's really a huge part of what goes on here.
Yep. Winning will cure everything, whether you like the players or not, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about getting those wins and having another chance to win a World Series. You get over it quick. I mean, you guys know, right? Being in the Northeast, some of those trades over the years with the Yankees, holding on to prospects or prospects they didn't want to trade. I mean, how many people were upset that Jarred Kelenic got traded away from the New York Mets at the time, right? They were pretty upset about that. It was Edwin Diaz, right? That came back, if I'm not mistaken, in that deal. And Kelenic was actually here with the Braves last year and has struggled to kind of find that consistency at the big league level. But there was fans that didn't like it, that didn't like seeing it. We saw with some Yankees prospects over the years. And so you never know. I mean, I'll trust our executives, the team that you're a fan of, and they may not always get it right. But a lot of times they do. I look at the Juan Soto trade that the Nationals made with the San Diego Padres. I mean, look at the big leaguers they got in return for him. Right, with CJ Abrams, with James Wood, Mackenzie Gore. Like, these are all really good players. Robert Haskell. Like, that trade, you can't repeat that. And that was 2 years of control of Juan Soto. But that was an unbelievable trade. That's what you kind of hope for, that you could pull this kind of thing off with a Skubal. The flip side of that is they don't work out that often. Nolan Arenado did not work out, right? The trade with Colorado to St. Louis, none of those guys really turned into the level of big leaguer that you were kind of hoping. So there's a lot of risk involved in doing it. Again, not fun to go out there, but you got to do it sometimes, right? I mean, Mookie Betts is a good example for Red Sox fans. I know it was frustrating, but the reality was you weren't probably going to sign him back. So you have to take that chance at some point. It's just not an easy thing to do. And so do you go for the 1 or 2? Maybe closer to sure things, or do you take the chance on the bigger lot of 4 or 5, and then every once in a while you hit the jackpot the way Mike Rizzo did when he was running the Nationals?
And one of the tough things for fans to accept is, and I know Yankee fans want something to happen now. The Mets want something to happen now, but you don't win these pennants in December. You want to see some activity. You want to see your roster being put together, but you're not going to win a pennant race in December.
No, I'm with you. I have some of that impatience too, of wanting to see things done, especially doing radio almost every day during the week. And so you want it to be busy. I do like that part of our sport and the way that it works. And some people talk about, would we be better off having a deadline, right? Having like a trading or a free agent deadline in the offseason, a free agent period like we see in the NBA. I don't think so. I think that even though there's times where it's slow, we are talking about baseball all year long because something can happen on Christmas, on Thanksgiving, on January 15th, where we just never know. And so that's kind of, I think, good for our sport. It keeps it, or tries to keep it somewhat in the news as long as possible. But therein lies the challenge. So yeah, you got to be patient, but none of us are.
And how does Atlanta look this year?
Good. They're in a really good spot. I mean, their roster was a bad year last year. Injuries like crazy to the pitching staff, unfortunately, was a big part of it. But those guys are healthy. And so things went pretty well. Sean Murphy had surgery in the offseason. Grant Holmes looks like he's in a good spot. Spencer Schwellenbach, like big-time contributors. Austin Riley missed time. Ozzie Albies missed time last year. Profar missed it because of the PED suspension. We know Ronald Acuna Jr. started the season late, then had to go on the IL again. They have good players, and a lot of guys that are locked up. They're just trying to figure out what they're going to do at shortstop. They did trade for Mauricio Dubon. He could end up being the guy if they don't get, say, Hassan Kim, or trade for a bigger name shortstop, which I think would be a possibility. They do need to rebuild the bullpen a little bit. Raisel Iglesias, who was their closer, is back on a one-year deal, but there's probably some work to be done there. And then we'll also see about whether or not they're going to add a starter. Alex Anthopoulos had talked about at the beginning of the year as a starter kind of being on the priority list. But all of a sudden, I think that's changed here a little bit because everyone seems to be healthy, and they are about 7 or 8 deep right now. So it's just a matter if you want to bring another guy. And I think if they do, it'll probably be more of a kind of a mid-rotation starter, or a Brad Keller type who could do both. I think would probably be a nice fit. But they're in a pretty good spot. And, of course, Suffern's own Walt Weiss is now the manager here in Atlanta, so we're excited about that.
That's right. CJ did, in fact, grow up in Suffern. So I was just thinking about that a little earlier today as I saw Walt on the MLB Network. CJ, as we wrap up here, Chris and I have a saying that if you like what we do, tell a friend. If you hate what we do, tell an enemy. Just tell somebody. Like, subscribe, do all of that.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. I feel the same way. Same thing on the radio side for us at MLB Network Radio. It's like that balance, right? You want people to like you, but you want people to be annoyed enough with you that they also want to listen to you so they can be annoyed at you.
As always, it's always great to catch up with you, CJ. We have to do this again during the season.
Sounds good. My pleasure. Take care, guys.